welcome to a very special legal tech talk in conjunction with HSO and Microsoft. My name is Frances Anderson, I'm the ND of Netlaw Media, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here today, where we are going to be discussing the law firm of the future, harnessing client relationships to drive growth with HSO and Microsoft. Now, today, what we're going to be looking at and what we're going to be discussing is changes in firm responsibilities and the need for business development, looking at supporting enabling lawyers in the business and marketing cycle, understanding better client relationship intelligence for introductions and developing relationships, and knowing your clients and your practice coverage for cross-sell retention, and a lot more. Now, so today we've got some really special guests. One of whom is Christina Blacklaws, former president of the Law Society of England and Wales, who will be chairing the session and who will bring you all into the debate along with the introduction to our various panelists as well. So this session, just so everyone is aware, is live. And therefore, if you would like to speak if you'd like to put questions, I should say, to the panelists and Christina, please do so through the bottom. If you have a look, you've got the chat function. You've also got a Q&A. So we will be monitoring it throughout the whole event for the next hour. So if you would like at any point for us to answer it, please put them there and we will then bring them up to the panelists' attention. Now, moving forward, our chair, Christina Blacklaws, is a formidable individual. She has studied jurisprudence at Oxford and qualified as a solicitor in 1991. Now, she is the former president, as I've highlighted, the Law Society of England and Wales, and represented the body of over 150,000 solicitors. So that's quite a lot. She's an innovator in the field and developed and managed one of the first virtual law firms and set up the UK's very first alternative business structure with the Cooperative Group. She was also one of the first directors of the innovation at the top UK firm. So welcome, Christina, and welcome to you all. And I am now delighted to hand it over to you, Christina, to take us through what's going to be happening today.
Oh, thank you, Frances. It's a great joy to be here, and thank you for your very warm introduction. When Frances asked me to chair this session, I thought, fantastic. It's absolutely in my sweet spot in terms of interest. But also, when she told me who the panelists were, I was sold. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to now introduce you to our fabulous panelists. In fact, I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves. And just one more little piece of housekeeping before we start. We're actually going to have two polls during this session. So, bit of audience participation, and please do have your questions in the Q&A section. I hope that we'll be able to get round to them all. But just to flag, we're going to have two polls, so get your voting buttons ready. Now, let me then turn to our fabulous panelists and ask each of them to introduce themselves. So, Razvan, let's start with you, please.
Thank you, Christina. I'm Razvan Cretu. I am the IT director at CMS. I've been working in legal for the last almost 20 years. I worked in other businesses before legal, so there was life before that. I've been with CMS for about 18 of those 20 years. That's about me. I'll hand it over to, I guess, Victoria.
Lovely.
Thank you, Razvan. I do not remember a time before legal. My career spans over 20 years working in-house at a variety of law firms in legal marketing and legal tech roles. And I'm now with HSO as an industry solution architect and the practice lead for the legal industry here.
Thank you. Miriam.
Hi, so thank you for having me. Miriam Lloyd from Microsoft. I lead our legal industry sector here in the UK. So I lead and manage teams aligned to the legal industry. We work with the firms to partner on digital transformation, ultimately.
And last but by no means least, Whit.
Thanks, Christina. And I'm glad you gave me less than 5 minutes to do this, so I'll rush through. Whit McIsaac, I'm the co-founder of the 360 Solutions Group and the Legal 360 organization. And I've had the pleasure of working with law firms now for the past 32 years. It's absolutely where all this gray hair came from, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. I've got a deep experience with all aspects of law firm technology. I sit on the board of Microsoft's Industry Advisory Committee worldwide for the legal marketplace. I've had the pleasure to work with law practices in Microsoft and the Legal 360 group for the last 2 decades, and building out some really incredible technology, again, around the globe. So it's been very interesting because we've had an opportunity, as you'll hear, as we get into the session, to work with firms from all different geographies and cultures and languages, and the requirements are different. So having that opportunity experience, it's been huge. So Christina and NetLaw Media Group, thank you guys for having us.
Well, not at all. And those who are watching live, those who are watching later on, I hope you agree we have a fantastic set of panelists. And my expectations this session are extremely high for insight and intelligent comment. So first of all, let's start with setting the scene a bit. I'm going to turn to you, Whit, actually, to just a little bit of horizon scanning. What's been going on? What's going on now, if you like, in the industry that's relevant to this discussion?
Christina, every year we talk about change in the legal marketplace and the legal business, but I'd have to argue heavily that the change that we're all experiencing right now in the business of legal is more so than we've ever seen in the past. And there's a number of factors that contribute to that. So the whole global consolidations, the intense specialization that's being put forward from these different practices and these different firms, the pressure from reduced legal spends and reduced panel sizes, aggressive competition. Victoria and I get an opportunity to meet with firms around the world, and seeing the things that these firms are doing to differentiate themselves and to aggressively grow their practices. We've never seen that before. It's almost like it's real business now. And then finally, some of the things that we'll talk a little bit about today, the use of technology, and it's had a defined impact on the way law practices are maintaining relationships with their clients, delivering legal services, attracting new clients. So it's had a radical change on the business. So in today's market, trying to do what you've done in the past, trying to rely on the standard scenarios, it just doesn't work anymore. So the relationship partners, the business development teams, they need to know the client, but not only the client, they need to know the challenges, the opportunities, the obstacles, the things that really are of interest to those clients. So I'll say one more time that the traditional methods of country club client identification, it doesn't work anymore. It's today's firms have to know their client, they have to know the requirements, and it's changed. So we'll talk about how technology affects that here as we get into the program. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, could not agree with you more. Victoria, you got anything to add on this?
Yeah, just wanted to say, with my 2 decades of working in-house, I saw some very significant changes within firm cultures. A lot of those were supported, if not underpinned, by changes in technology as well. Examples of that in more recent years is where firms have needed to diversify their practice areas. So some examples would be most recently with COVID-19, being able to advise their clients on how that would affect their business, but also other things, cybersecurity. A lot of firms have practices now focusing on cybersecurity. Over here in the US, cannabis is now a prominent practice group for many firms. So being able to diversify that way, but also embrace technology to ensure that ongoing firm success is so critical.
Yeah, it's really interesting how the diversification, particularly I think from cyber, is changing the work of lawyers. Yeah, Razvan, what about you?
Yeah, so technology is evolving nowadays at a completely different pace that it used to be. I love the book from that Andrew McAfee wrote, The Second Machine Age. He describes in that book very clearly why technology is evolving the way it is. And we are now in that second part of the chessboard where everything is exponential. And as technology advances the way it does, it brings things like ChatGPT and all sorts of other things into the mix. And when that happens, people need to change, as Whit was saying, the way they were working before. And that's not just legal, it's in general in absolutely every single industry. But specifically in legal, people are used to work in a very traditional way, in a very standard way. And that way is now being challenged by all of these emerging technologies and everything that is being brought on. So I think this is where the firms need to look, first of all. From our perspective, from a CMS perspective, this is where we are looking as well. And this is why we started to build various tools, including at the CMS Central. We built an environment that allows us to serve clients a lot better, because it condenses all the data into one group. So yeah, technology changes. We need to keep up. Otherwise, we're just going to be left behind.
Well, I'm sure the audience wish to hear a lot more about what CMS have been doing in this space. But before we go to our first poll, Miriam, actually, can you just give your thoughts on this, please?
Yeah, absolutely. To add to the comments already shared, I think like Razvan says, actually, across all industries, a theme I'm seeing is a focus on agility and resiliency to stay relevant. And I absolutely see that in the legal industry, that focus on agility and resiliency. If we think about the last couple of years, a lot of external headwinds, drivers for economic changes evolving, client expectations changing, and therefore that focus on innovation and agility. I see a key part of that being how firms use that data and their data insights to create better client experiences, but also that empowering and enabling of lawyers that we'll touch on later on.
Great. So a challenging set of circumstances, environmental, the work that lawyers are doing and the way that they are delivering it are all in a state of flux. And that's why we're talking about it today. So let's have a poll. So over to you, audience. As you can see, there's a poll hopefully appeared on your screens. And it's a question we're really interested in you answering. So which area will be your biggest technology priority over the next 24 months? You can only choose one. So have a look. Hopefully it won't take you very long to do it. So it's moving off-prem to cloud, finances, marketing, business development, or operations. Which is going to be the biggest technology challenge? Give you another few seconds to answer that, and then we'll see what the audience says. And those of you who are watching afterwards, see if you agree with the answer. Okay, brilliant. Should we? Let's pull the poll up and see. Okay, so interesting. Business development comes out on top, but only just. Business development, operations, moving off-premise to the cloud. Going to close that if we can, so I can see everybody there. See everybody again. Anybody surprised by that, or is that exactly what you would expect in terms of the biggest technology challenges over the next 24 months? Anybody want to?
Yeah, Christina, if I may, if we were doing this 5 years ago, pre-COVID, I would have expected that on-prem to the cloud was absolutely the most important thing, especially in the legal community. So So seeing where that is and seeing that firms now understand the importance and they've begun to navigate their way, that's encouraging.
Yeah, I think that's right. Miriam, you're nodding about that as well.
Yeah, agreed. I think we'll touch on that throughout, but absolutely, there's been a lot of accelerated, I think, digital transformation for a number of reasons.
And the focus on business development is something, fortunately, that we are going to go into now. So can I move us then on to our first topic of discussion, and that's around changes in firms' responsibilities and the need for business development. Perhaps, Miriam, you could kick us off on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I actually think it's a really interesting time for the legal industry, and we've kind of touched on that a little bit. The last couple of years, we've seen the firms go through accelerated digital transformation. And I think that poll actually alluded to some of that, right? If we look at it, it's for a number of reasons, I think. One, a lot of the firms have adopted a new way of working because of the pandemic. Secondly, a lot of the clients of the firms have gone through their own digital transformation, and therefore their expectations have evolved and changed. I think there's a big focus in the law firms around their talent as well, attracting, retaining talent, and also on some of the aspects that we touched on earlier, like competition. And for me, a big focus area that's really interesting is as we continue to support the firms on digital transformation, it's getting those foundations right, not just at a technology level, but operationally and from a cultural change lens.
Okay, so these things have to go hand in hand from your perspective. Victoria, do you agree with that?
I do completely. And certainly in a competitive industry, it's absolutely vital that firms are proactive. They can't afford to be reactive with their client's business. Understanding the opportunities and threats within each client's industry and the impacts of their business, so as they can proactively advise on those things. And I've seen sort of over the last 10 to 15 years, many firms have now got entire teams that focus purely on that type of industry analysis, competitive analysis, so as they can stay at the front of all of those things to be able to advise clients appropriately and become the trusted advisor that every lawyer and every firm wants to be at. But a key element of this as well is around relationship intelligence, and the way firms need to be considering succession planning to make sure that the client relationships are being maintained, as well as the business from those clients as senior partners within firms start to move on.
Okay, Whit, agree, disagree?
Yeah. No, absolutely. Just right in line with Miriam and Victoria. The proactive component couldn't be any more important, right? So today, these clients do not expect us to be reactive. So unless I'm ahead of the client, unless I understand the challenges and the threats and the opportunities, and unless I have a preliminary strategy on how we're going to address that with the client, and I understand what level of experience we have and how we can leverage that experience to help the client navigate those scenarios, again, you can't do it the old way. So, I'll just say flat out that the lawyers, the law firms, and practice groups are responsible these days for keeping the client informed, and it has to be proactive, and you have to have the message clearly communicated, and it can't be muddled in the way of additional spam educational emails that they may or may not be interested in. You have to be focused, and you have to be on point. And I'll throw a scenario in here that causes a challenge, which is the volume of data that's available now that has to be consumed and managed and parsed to determine what information needs to be communicated to the client. It's enormous. And then aside from the fact that it's just enormous, it changes, and it changes very, very quickly. So if I don't have my finger on the pulse of this data and the content that affects my clients, they're going to get that information from somewhere else. And talking about business development, there's groups out there that are looking for opportunities to find clients that aren't being well educated by their existing counsel. So the challenge is, how do you find it? How do you manage it? effectively communicate it and become or continue to be a relevant, resilient, source of information for these clients. And Victoria, back to the relationship intelligence piece is just a perfect example, right? So for 2 decades, we've talked about if we could just figure out who knows who, right? Who's connected to who. So it's way more than that now. So it's who do we know? What relationships do we have? Who's connected to those contacts? What type of a relationship is it? Is it a business relationship? Is it a personal relationship, right? Is it an arts relationship and a football relationship? So what are the areas of interest that these different contacts are involved with? And then again, how do we communicate at their level, the information that's necessary for them to be able to handle the challenges and the obstacles that they have? So thanks.
I love this relationship intelligence concept. I'm going to take that one and run with it. So, but also, you talked a lot about data and harvesting and getting the insight from data. Razvan, what's your take on that?
Well, I could not agree more with the panelists, and especially now that the law firms are under pressure to deliver more high quality data in a very in an environment that it has a lot of competition for the likes of Big Four from the alternative business service, but alternative legal services. We have the technology advances that I was talking about, and then even pressures from the businesses to actually keep the costs down. So all of these things, all of these factors are pushing businesses towards having a more specialized and at the same time more global type of environment. And I think here is an element that can be addressed with a well-managed relationship management software, a proper CRM that can help the lawyers within that marketing cycle.
Yeah, that's really essential, isn't it? I've got a couple of questions that have come in. I'm going to ask the first one now from Martin Burston. So Martin says, it'd be really interesting to know if it's possible to split between large, medium, and small firms in that poll response to moving to the cloud. So, what do the panelists think? Do you think that is something that is the purview of the large firm only, or does it also relate, or perhaps the other way around? Perhaps it's an awful lot easier for smaller law firms to move to the cloud than larger ones. What's your instinct on this?
I would actually say we're seeing more of the smaller firms moving into the cloud. The larger firms are still the ones that have the reticence to make that move. So I think with taking those leaps, we're seeing it more with the smaller and medium-sized firms, but there are the larger firms that are starting, if not underway with that already, starting that progress of moving to the cloud.
Okay.
I think it.
Yeah, Razvan.
I think it also. It's also important to understand what type of clients that law practice is serving, because in many circumstances, the security of a specific firm, and this was the blocker for the biggest firms for them moving to the cloud, the security element. So the security is basically being pushed down from the clients. So you have to abide by certain security regulations, and because those security elements were not yet as mature in the cloud, some of the larger firms or even smaller firms, but in specific that were operating in specific sectors, they were unable to move to the cloud. That again started to change a year and a bit ago. And I think this is where that technology advancement that I was talking about comes in.
Yeah. So do you feel that we've reached the tipping point then?
I believe we do. I see that for us as well, because us being a relatively large firm, it was difficult for us to move into the clouds as easy as other firms were able to. And I was looking around, I was seeing them moving to those cloud solutions, and I wanted to do the same, but I was unable to, whilst preserving the security of our environment. Now I can do that, and we are now in a journey to move services to the cloud. It's not a let's move everything. It's putting the right workload where it belongs, but I am able to put more in the cloud now that I was able to put a few years back.
Really interesting. So sort of watch this space within the sort of large global law firm practice and a nuanced approach then. Right. So let's move on to the second topic for discussion, which is about supporting and enabling lawyers in the business and marketing cycle. And we've also had a question from an attendee about how to get lawyers to adopt. We all know that you can have this wonderful technology, but actually, if the lawyers aren't willing to use it, then it might as well be sitting on the shelf gathering dust. So how do you approach that? Razvan, maybe we could come to you first. Thank you.
So in terms of lawyers, it's very difficult to get someone to adopt technology, but if you embed that technology into their daily work routine, in what they're doing on a daily basis, make it very, very simple for them to use, make it easily accessible from whatever application they're working in, if that's Teams or if that's Outlook or whatever it is, make it as integrated as possible with their world, then that's when people will start to engage with that technology. If you ask them to, go to this link to access the CRM, and would you mind going into the contacts database, clicking a plus and manually adding all the contact details, they're going to say, of course, yes, I will do exactly that. Not really.
Yeah, I that sounds like, sort of advice from hard-won experience.
You need to make it easy for them.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say at this point about the sort of supporting and enabling lawyers in the business and marketing cycle?
Yeah. So from a CRM perspective, so if you think of what a CRM used to offer the lawyers and what can offer nowadays, I think the most important part is to emphasize the relationship, as Whit was saying, the type of relationships that you have with each of the clients. And also, you need to do client segmentation. So split them on size, revenue, and so on. And that will allow you to have real-time insights back. But not just to the lawyer that is working directly with that client, but in general, you can get insights on a particular type of practice, so energy, for example, or banking. So, and you could get all of those analytics back. You could do a lot of orchestration and automation, which goes to the adoption side that I was talking about. So the more orchestration, the more automation you put in to harvest things like credentials and so on from people's either emails or contacts, all of that will help build that that knowledge base that everybody can share afterwards and work off.
Yeah, make it as easy and as simple and as intuitive, and get the robots to do as much as possible. Yeah,
absolutely.
Victoria, what do you think?
Just to echo what Razvan said, technology really needs to support lawyers in a non-invasive manner. It's got to deliver what they need when they need it without interrupting their billable work, which is their primary focus. During my time in-house, I would always look for ways to sell the technology and get user adoption by focusing on the what's in it for me message. What's in it for the individual lawyer, their clients, their practice group, the firm in general. And speaking to lawyers individually one-on-one, a lot of the time to find out what their sort of concerns, issues, holdbacks were with adopting new technology. But then also using data to illustrate examples and cases and where things were going right. A quick example I'll give of that is we were tracking all of our pitches and RFPs within our CRM system. And we added fields in there to track not only the date of issue for an RFP, but the date it was received by the marketing and BD department. Because what we were seeing was RFPs would sit on a lawyer's desk for several weeks, and then they would get a reminder that the deadline was coming up, and then it would come to the marketing and BD department. So significantly shortening the amount of time that we had to do a response. So then we were seeing higher loss rates. So using that data, we were able to change behaviors because we were able to say, look, if you give us less time, we're not going to win this. So then is it valuable to spend the time responding to this RFP in less time than we would have had? Saying that, it makes sense, but actually showing the data and the analytics of that really started to change those behaviors. So my advice on the question that came in before is look for the what's in it for me, the WIFM messages for individual lawyers, for their practice groups, for the firm generally. And then also start small with functionality. Start with limited amount and grow over time. If it's everything a CRM system can do on day one, it's overwhelming. You don't know where to begin. So look at what data is of most important to you. What can we show you on a dashboard so you don't have to go looking for it? It's there from day one. A couple of things to help with getting that lawyer buy-in.
Brilliant. That's really insightful and helpful. Miriam?
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo those points, both of those. I think if we think about competitive edge for firms, it comes from their lawyers and their lawyers thriving and their lawyers being empowered and enabled with the right data insights. And it kind of comes back to that piece that I mentioned at the start around the importance of talent within a firm, retaining and attracting talent. And a key focus, I think, is around helping smarter processes, right? So enabling the lawyer to work smarter, not harder, taking friction out the system, bringing data insights, as Razvan and Victoria talked about, in the natural flow of the lawyer's workflow. So actually not disrupting billable. Also in a hybrid workplace, how do you surface and share that knowledge and that insight across the firm? And one piece that I thought was quite interesting, recently we shared our Microsoft Workplace Index report. And a key theme there was about companies re-recruiting their employees through providing opportunities to learn and grow. And for the legal firms, I see that as an important area. How do they support and enable their lawyers? How do they bring those insights, that knowledge, that connectivity to enable them, empower them, but also support well-being as well?
Yeah, I think thematically what we're getting here is just, make it frictionless, make it something that delivers to the lawyers what they need to be able to do their work better, have better relationships with their clients. Whit, any final comment on this before we move on to the next question? And talking of questions, we've got a couple here. I'm going to ask Sabrina's question at the end of this.
Yeah, so I'll be brief. Easy is huge, but the other piece Razvan touched on, if we don't drive this information out and deliver it to the lawyers, the likelihood that they're going to come find it is minimal. So, we just finished a project with a group based out of New York, and starting the project, the premise was lawyers are not going to sign into the system and they're not going to put data into the system. So unless you can deliver it to them, the chances of it getting consumed, not going to happen. So what's happened is the technology that's available, the underpinnings that drive this, the consolidation with other systems, the integration, the dataverse, artificial intelligence is real. At 11 minutes into today's session, we heard Chat GPT. right? So if anybody hasn't looked into Chat GPT yet, it's going to be the next major impact in the legal marketplace, in my opinion. So massively complex, complicated infrastructure to deliver very simple data to people that have to have it served on a platter for them. And unless that premise isn't followed all the way through, like Victoria said, if it's overly complicated, their eyes are going to roll back in their head. They're not going to look at it. They're not going to use it. So,
Yeah. So you really need to take them to it and make it really accessible for them. There's no point having a lovely system that they just don't get to. Great insight. Thank you. Now, Sabrina's asked a question in the Q&A. She says, we have challenges with fee earners inputting their time entries. Everybody in law will relate to this. Some still input at the end of the month rather than putting there and then or at the end of the day. Any help here for them? Any insight? Maybe Razvan, what do you think?
It's going to be very difficult to change that. I think every single law firm has this struggle. It's all about building the idea that it's in people's best interest to actually do the daily timesheets to be able to bill properly. So incentivize the ones that do and penalize the ones that don't. That's probably the only way you can do it right. It is a very difficult subject. It's not going to be fixed with any type of CRM system or any type of automation. You could try to use, so there are all sorts of AI enhanced systems nowadays, but there is not one that will fully put those entries in the system automatically on the lawyer's behalf. So the lawyer will still have to look through whatever the AI captured in that day and still need to put them through. There is no workaround for this, unfortunately.
Oh, I thought you were going to offer us a magic wand there. It's nothing of the sort. Anybody else got a magic wand? No. So we'll talk about what we can do then. Sorry, Sabrina. And let's move ourselves on to the next topic. There's a lovely question about top tips, and I'm gonna ask my panelists sort of quick fire at the end to think about their top 3 tips. So panelists start to think about that now. But the third section, we're talking about better client relationship intelligence for introductions and for developing those client relationships. Victoria, why don't you start us off with this one?
Okay, sure. Following up on what Whit opened up with, saying about, finding that the who knows whom information, what that relationship is based on. Also, then the next level of that is, what's that individual's role within their organization at the client level? So are they a decision maker? Do they hold a budget? And those things are very important for relationship intelligence. It's really kind of that law firms do business with companies, and then the contacts and the relationships are the conduits to that business. So those relationships are really the lifeblood of a firm. And again, if we are expecting lawyers to submit information about who they know and how well they know them and when they last met them manually, it's not going to happen. You're taking them away from billable work. It's that sort of tedious, laborious admin that, quite frankly, nobody has time to do. So we have to be able to gather this information passively from what they're doing day to day. So from sending and receiving emails, from having appointments that are logged in their calendar, gathering that information and then sharing that information. I think what's critical is that firms are transparent with that who knows whom, so as you can truly nurture those relationships, but also it fosters cross-selling. So if I'm a lawyer in a firm and I can go into a system and I can see a new relationship has been added with a lawyer in a different practice group for somebody that I already know, I can go and speak to that lawyer and be like, hey, like, do you have some potential work for this client? I've been doing work for them. I can give you some insight instead of the, why are you talking to my client? You shouldn't be doing that, and having that closed approach. I've certainly seen that as being a huge shift within the culture of firms in the time that I was in-house, of moving away from that, these are my contacts, I'm not going to share them, to I understand why it's important to identify the relationships that I have with people. Both to identify, I already know this person, if you need to know something about them, come to me first, but to be able to have that ability to cross-sell and keep up with those competitive demands.
Yeah, it's a huge problem often in law firms, isn't it? Where they see their contacts as belonging to them, the partner, as opposed to belonging to the firm. Whit, what do you think about this issue?
Yeah, right in line with that thought process, Christina. You know, the relationships that the lawyers have with their contacts, the relationships that the client has with their client, that's the intellectual property of this organization, and that's the way that it needs to be focused on. And you have to protect your IP as aggressively as you can. So from that standpoint, having lawyers contribute contacts, keep their contacts close to their vest. You know, we've built technology that allows us to go to those contacts and say, I know this is an important contact to yours, and I know you would prefer people not to be communicating with you, but there's 78 other fee earners in this organization that are connected to that contact, and they're having communications with the contact, and this is what their relationship strength is. So if you're not connected, then nobody knows how important that relationship is. So from that standpoint, it's critically important that that these contacts be harvested, and in a lot of cases, harvested electronically and use signature scraping. The other piece is changes happen fast now. So people leave for any number of reasons, okay? And that triggers down another 6 or 7 different changes to relationships that you have with the client or potential new clients. And unless that information is communicated fast to the employees, to the balance of the firm, to the practice groups, it puts you at risk. Because, you know, if it's 2 weeks before you realize that general counsel's moved on and somebody else is already in there and they're meeting with the person that they worked with at their previous organization, that's a challenge. Last thing I'll bring up, Victoria, you know, we call it zippering, client relationship zippering. So often everybody focuses on those top relationships, but what happens down below? You know, who's working with the client? What associates do we have working with essentially the same level people at the client? So if a change occurs, we're zippered. We got this connection across the whole group. So it reduces the risk associated with any significant change that takes place from a resource standpoint. So we learned that from the architecture, engineering, construction marketplace. That's one of the first things that they do when they look at their client relationship is, how do we zipper this? How do we make sure that we protect the firm from any potential changes?
I love that concept of zippering. Victoria, you got your hand up, but obviously, what a
Yeah,
run.
I wanted to preempt a question that might come in. That's, how do you change that culture of lawyers not wanting to share their contacts and who they know and how they know them? And one way that I approached that at firms I was at was by establishing firm-wide policies around that there was no opt-out option. You're using the firm's systems. These are the firm's clients, the firm's relationships. So establishing those policies and then making that part of the firm's culture is one way to tackle that. You are probably always going to get still some lawyers that don't want to share. I would always just leave those to one side and move on to the lawyers that did want to partake and did want to embrace the technologies and did want to move on. And slowly and surely, sort of those people will eventually come along.
Yeah, 80-20 approach. Razvan, what do you think?
I think on top of what Whit and Victoria were saying, one of the things that lawyers would need to do a lot better is to find relationships between clients and outline those. As again, those connections will probably be able to facilitate other introductions to other clients. Again, the opportunity to do cross-sell, and it will allow them to build that network of influence for each of their clients, because that's basically how it is in the real world. Also, I think it's very important to have notifications of events coming up, like a contract renewals. So if one of the lawyers was involved in a specific transaction and they know that the contract is due to be renewed, proactively going to the client and saying, oh, I know that this contract is up for renewal. Are you going to renew the contract? Can we help you with that? Or are you going to go to an RFP? Can we help you with that element, and so on? So again, you would be able to do a lot more cross-selling in a situation like that, and basically bring new business into the firm. But even notifications for things like birthdays. So if you go to a client on the person that you're working with birthday and say happy birthday, they will feel flattered and they will understand that you care as their lawyer, more than just when you need some work, you can come to me. You build that very interpersonal relationship that the lawyers will be, that the clients will be looking for. Is literally a shift in the culture. And as Victoria and Whit were saying, the culture needs to change towards sharing and collaboration, and making that that information accessible to all of the lawyers in the firm. Ultimately, to offer the clients what they need, which is that single that single client experience. It's not the user experience in this case; it's the client experience that they will seek from the entire firm. So depending on who they're talking to in the firm, they will have the same feeling, the same type of experience.
Brilliant. So a bit more of Victoria's what's in it for me as well to really drive that cultural change. Miriam, any last thoughts on this topic before we move to the next?
I'll just add a couple of things. I mean, just echoing what everybody else has really shared. I mean, that client intelligence and insight is key to create a more valuable relationship, but also a stickier relationship. The consistency of the experience for the client, but also enabling, as we come back to that data, and having the data and the insights at the right time for the lawyer to be proactive and informed, again, is a really key piece. So I think it comes back to the data within a firm, be able to understand what that looks like, surface it in the right way, and use it as a strategic asset.
Yeah, I really like that. Data is a strategic asset. Thank you. So let's have our second poll. So if we can pop that up from behind the scenes, there we are. So in this one, we're asking what the biggest challenge that you've seen your firm face in the post-pandemic environment. Again, I'm sorry, colleagues, you can only choose one, but which is the biggest one? And whilst we're waiting for the responses, just to say that I have noted the other two questions that are really excellent questions. We'll come to those, I think, at the end of the end of the session. So we've got one more topic I really, really want us to get through, and then hopefully we'll have a couple of minutes at the end. So let's have a look and see what the results are for poll number 2. I think a pretty clear winner there, keeping up with ever-changing technologies. Panelists, do you agree with that?
Yeah.
Yes.
yes, and yes. Well, in a sense, it's great that we're all singing from the same hymn sheet, because these are very, very challenging things that we are trying to address. So if there are right ways of doing it, we're clear about what the challenges are, and we can hopefully, and we'll come on to the top tips at the end, hopefully we can give you some good ideas about how to meet those challenges. And one of the things that we wanted to discuss today is about knowing your clients, your practice coverage for cross-sell and retention. So, Whit, running a little short of time, so just a couple of highlights from you on this. Thank you.
Yeah, and Razvan, he touched on the key element here, which is a single view of the client. So not only, the client demographic data and the matters and the engagements, but, what relationships do we have? What practice groups are involved? Which geographic locations are engaged with the client? And then what that does is it gives us the opportunity to identify where the white space is. So if I look at our top 20 clients and I see that the penetration from those clients for our practice groups is 3.4 practice groups, and I look at one of these other groups and we only have 2 practice groups involved, there's white space there. So, and if there's not white space, I want to know why it doesn't represent white space. So the single view of the client, aggregating data from these other systems, bringing it together, making it easy to understand. Essentially, it's not relationship intelligence, it's business intelligence at this point. Where do we have opportunity? Who do we have in the organization that's got that experience, and who has the relationship that can help deliver that message? Those are things that are absolutely critical in today's business development, marketing, and know your client scenarios.
Yeah, Victoria, I'm sure you want to add from your in-house perspective.
Again, just this has to be done in a non-invasive manner. As a lawyer, if I have to go search for information, figure out how to consume it, and then do something with it, the technology has failed me. So we need to find ways to push data at lawyers that's relevant to them without them having to go searching for it.
Yeah, I think that's coming across as a real key. I think it's been mentioned by everybody. So effectively, one of the top tips. Number one, Razvan.
Yeah, so I can only echo what Whit and Victoria was saying. It's a very important practice to identify those gaps, and I think technology can now help with identifying those. As I was talking about earlier, you can segment your clients in various ways to actually get meaningful data about those specific segments, identify the gap, and basically proactively go to the clients to fulfill those unmet needs. And again, even if they are being served by other companies, you being proactive and going to them and explaining that you have the experience in that specific area and you are willing to help if they want to, I think it will go a long way in building that client relationship. And ultimately, for the client to come back to you whenever they need something additional.
Brilliant, thank you. And Miriam, what are your views on this?
Yeah, again, completely echo the sentiment shared already. I mean, the 360-degree view of a client is key. If we're thinking about how to dial up the growth within a firm, the kind of actions that we need to take to retain clients as well. So all of those pieces are critical. I think it comes back to the points already made, understanding the data within the firm, surfacing that, sharing that across the firm, so that actually you can make really informed decisions. And again, I think it comes back to data being a strategic asset to enable the agility, firms to be proactive, as we said, but also resilient.
Yeah. It seems that's a key concept from thematically from what you're saying is about that resilience, isn't it? So I feel like we've already had dozens of top tips here, but let's focus in on that question. So what are your 3 top tips for a successful CRM implementation? Who wants to wade in here? Victoria.
Jump in there. So first off, approach this with a change management strategy. This is not just about implementing software. This is about changing behaviors. So have a strategy in place for how to do that. As part of that, have a well-defined communications plan. As you implement, make sure you share success stories within those communications, but also act upon feedback. Your end users are your most valuable resource of making sure that you've built a system that they will use. So act on feedback. A very quick tip, what I've done in the past is created short surveys with fairly loaded questions of functionality that we knew we could deliver very quickly. And if we had yes, that would be great to do, we would be able to roll that out fast. Number 2, take a phased approach to a CRM implementation, both in terms of the functionality, what I said earlier on. If you try and show everything, all the bells and whistles on day one, it's too much, it's overwhelming. But also a phased approach in the user rollout. So you don't need to do a big bang, everybody gets it on day one. Do that phased approach, identifying whether it's key client teams, practice groups, by office, but do that in a phased approach too. And the third one is what I said earlier about building dashboards and reports that push information out to your end users, to the lawyers. So they don't have to learn, how many clicks it takes to get into the right record type, to then click on the right thing to get to the report. Utilize dashboards to present that information, and whether that's visually with graphs and charts, or it's those smaller kind of subgrids of lists of information sorted by date first, so they're seeing the most relevant information to them first.
Brilliant. Top tips. Anybody want to add in just very quickly anything else to those top tips?
I would add to that the a data cleanup is needed, because otherwise the insights that you would get on the data could be wrong, and that's more dangerous than not having any insights at all.
Razvan, I couldn't agree more. The data piece of this thing, number one reason why these systems struggle is that they're not easy to use. The number 2 reason that they struggle is the data either isn't there, or if it is there, it's not correct. And once they see some data in there that's not correct, all the confidence goes away, right? So then it's just, I'm not going to spend the time. So very, very important.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And I would add from my side, kind of the 3 top tips. I think this goes with any technology, right? Is firstly, technology operationally, and then cultural change. So from a technology perspective, the adoption framework, the centers of excellence, that kind of foundational piece that we touched on. From an operational standpoint, we've had a lot today, making it seamless, frictionless. As Whit has said, let's make sure that it operates well within the firm. And then finally, ultimately, it comes down to the lawyers and the clients. So what's in it for them that we've spoken about, making sure that it's actually enabling the lawyers to thrive, to create a better experience. I think that bit's a critical piece. The 3 play really well together.
Excellent. Well, hopefully, audience, you've been noting these down, or we will, as I intend to do, replay this session and take notes, because there's been so much valuable insight and content, I think. There was a great question from John Nidecker about how potentially disruptive do we see ChatGPT. And I don't think we're going to have time to do that question any justice. So I would just say that I think 2 weeks ago, there was an article in the Sunday Times which said about the top 10 things that you will no longer need to do because of ChatGPT. And one of them was instruct a lawyer. And so, I don't subscribe to that, but I do think, like with all technology, all of these developments that all of our panelists have been talking about, we absolutely must take it very seriously and, harness it and utilize the technology, because that will make us extremely valuable to our clients. So with that,
If I might add one thing, technology is not going to replace the lawyers, but lawyers who use technology are going to replace the ones that don't.
Yeah, absolutely, Razvan. And that's a great point, I think, for us to finish this session. But I can't sign off without saying an enormous thank you to our wonderful panelists, and to NetLaw Media for making this happen. Delighted that from my perspective, and I hope from yours, we've had some fabulous insight. Hopefully this will help you on your journey. So thank you very much, panelists, and thank you and goodbye to our audience.